All right, I'll call the meeting to order. I'd like to start by acknowledging that this meeting is respectfully held on the traditional territory of the Sycos First Nation, on whose land we live, work, and play. You have an agenda in front of you. Would somebody like to move adoption? Seconder? And there were no additions or deletions, I take it? No. All in favor? Carried. You have the meetings from the June 12th regular meeting. Would somebody like to move adoption? Seconder? All in favor? Carried. We don't have any bylaws. 5.1 delegations. Rio Tinto, over to you, Andrew.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mayor, Council. Pleasure to be here. Just want to confirm that everybody can hear and our audio visual seems to be working well.
Looks good.
Excellent, excellent. I love when technology works. So look, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak this evening. Firstly, I will also acknowledge that I am currently residing on the Haisla traditional territory and acknowledge that Rio Tinto's operations span across First Peoples lands and territories, both across Canada and globally. And we want to acknowledge those community members that host us and on lands on whom we operate. I will kick off and share my screen. I think you all have the package as well, but just for ease of presentation so we can all keep up, I'll share the screen. Okay, so today I'm just going to look and touch on a few key milestones before we dive into the hydrology and the other sides of the business. So we have reached 90% operational capacity. The last time we spoke and updated, we're significantly less than that following the labourer dispute that happened in mid-2021. Quite pleased to see that we've been going through that rebuilding phase, restarting phase, and we have reached that milestone of 90%. And looking forward to getting back to 100% production by probably the early part of the fall period this year. So just working through that steady, but it is also worth acknowledging that, you know, it's a process that requires multiple parts to keep up, and we're only ever as strong as our weakest area. So we have all of these sub-assemblies and sub-facilities that have come online, and all of those need to perform in order to support the smelting operation. We currently have around 2,400 people employed at the smelter directly. And then we have also around another 1,500 contractors that are either directly supporting the smelter site or that are working in and around the business, producing projects, sustaining capital works, and supporting the industry, all of that north of Prince George. Okay, I'll head to the next slide. A significant piece of work that is obviously quite close to the district of Van der Hoof. We are currently undertaking our 7-year dam safety review. This is a requirement under the provincial regulation for dam safety and is also a requirement under Rio Tinto's Act, Rio Tinto's management system for water storage facilities. So we've awarded that to Clone Krippenberger. That work is currently underway. I actually met the teams in the field 2 weeks ago to just go over what they're seeing, what they're undertaking. And this also comprises the inundation mapping study, which will integrate the sonar work that was done 2 years ago. It will provide us a refreshed and revised probable maximum flood in line with the Canadian Dam Association's recommendations and adaptations for climate change. And it provides us all of the ongoing and flow-through inputs to the dam safety review process, the dam emergency planning process, and then also provides us that condition assessment and snapshot in time to allow us to continue progressing the works to not only maintain the asset, but enhance the asset as we go. So that's going well. Nothing, certainly, you know, from my time in the field talking to the team, there was nothing that they were alarmed or overly concerned with. And that is something that later in the year, as that wraps up, we will be presenting back to the province of British Columbia, but also to all of the downstream and impacted communities as we revise that. So fairly big piece of work, occupying a lot of my time, a lot of my team's time, and certainly a holistic review. Okay. I'll touch on the Water Engagement Initiative just briefly. Look, and really appreciate the continuing support of the District of Vanderhoof via that process. We are getting to the end of phase 1 and working, actually this week, I'll be in Vanderhoof for the meetings on Wednesday and Thursday, and looking forward to that phase 1 report out very shortly. So the team is building what the package of that looks like, considering both flows, enhancements, physical works, etc., in order to continue building out and fleshing out the best possible outcomes there. I am pleased to say that we have engaged more broadly with what have been previously non-participating First Nations, and we have been integrating First Nations into the process later in, so that we're getting a more holistic view at all interests that are being represented. So continuing to progress and continuing to push towards that first phase readout, and that will really set the stage moving into the second phase, which will consider changes outside of the current regulatory framework and changes in a way that can deal with enhancements in flow that do require some kind of change to the regulation. Okay, we'll shift gears from the Water Engagement Initiative and we'll dive straight into the water situation that we're seeing here in 2023. It is quite an unusual year, and I'll touch on that a little bit as we go through, but I'm sure it's no surprise to most that it is a hot and dry spring. And for those who are sort of following, this is actually the hottest and driest spring we have on record. We haven't seen a similar one previously. Reservoir elevation has been trending up, and it was quite a dramatic trend up once that precipitation stopped and we saw the snow melt happen. We are actually petering off, and we'll see in a couple other slides that we will be trending towards a level off within the coming weeks. So, that dry spring certainly being reflected in reservoir elevation. And then when you compare that to the 2022 trends, you can see that, reservoir elevation we expect to finish considerably short of by the time we get to sort of that mid-July period, which is the peak. I'll touch more on that in a moment, but again, just calling out other notable years. 2015 there in blue, where you saw coming from a significantly lesser reservoir level in November all the way through to what was a high water situation. And then looking at 2007, which was that extreme year that you can see following through here, again started considerably lower. And then we had that incredibly large snowpack and wet spring that led to the high water events in 2007. Certainly nothing like that in the forecast from what we're seeing, and certainly would require an unprecedented event to push us up towards a full reservoir and flood caps. Flows, this is the instantaneous snapshot that we pull out of the system looking at the last 30 days. You can see the Vanderhoof flow peaked up around the 140 cubic metre per second and has been trending down slowly ever since. And that coincides with the regression of the low-lying snowpacks. As we've seen those exhaust significantly earlier than normal, a lot of the low-lying watersheds are continuing to exhaust, and without the precipitation to keep topping them up, is driving those water levels quite low. Similarly, we're seeing the Noddely River reached its peak right around the first of the month as well. A month ago, and we're seeing that continue to trend down and regress. There was a little bit of a peak that popped in there from the Notley. I actually suspect that was an instrument error, but there was a little bit of a bump during that wet weekend a couple of weeks ago, and then you can see the regression since. Skins Lake Spillway we tried to adapt the feedback from the Water Engagement Initiative and then from First Nations and look to replicate a spring freshet. So we actually did a bump up of flows from Skins Lake Spillway above minimum flow and tried that. But we continued to see the dry period continue. We continued to see unregulated rivers coming down. So took the decision to drop that spillway discharge, firstly to protect the reservoir levels and to protect against a future empty reservoir state. But secondly, also we just continued to see those that lack of precipitation, so it just required that intervention. It was a shift from the status quo, trying that release, and ultimately we've had to back out. But this is the thinking around how do we create flow targets, but how do we also answer the needs of protecting reservoir elevation. Lastly, you can see sort of a couple of the other, the Stalaco River running in there as well, running quite low for this time of year. And then white, I'm not sure what the white trend is there. Okay. Water temperatures, again, we're still early in the season, but quite interesting to see water temperatures bumping up and off of 20 degrees already. Certainly in Vanderhoof, we've seen some of those up close to 20. And then I seem to have lost some of my colours have washed out in the change here. But ultimately you can see Narachaco River at Vanderhoof up fairly high for this time of year. And then at Finmore, even that's getting close to 20 degrees C. So we haven't started STMP flows yet, and certainly we're not at the point where we're looking at summer temperature flows from the salmon perspective, but just interesting looking at those water temperatures so early in the season. Looking at precipitation, and this is where the story about the dry spring really starts to come in. Over the last month across the watershed, we've accumulated sort of just around 25 millimetres on average, which is quite low for this time of year. Typically, we very, very seldom see periods of time going back that far without significant rainfall events. And then when you plot back another month before that, we're actually coming up to sort of 55 days without a significant rainfall. So quite a dry extended period. And that's continuing in the forecast. You know, again, to be seeing sort of zero precipitation on a 10-day forecast in the western part of the reservoir is certainly quite unusual for this time of year. So, you know, we're not expecting any dramatic change anytime soon. And we're doing a number of sensitivity analyses to understand if this dry period continues throughout the summer, what could that look like for the reservoir, the hydrology, and ultimately the rivers. Similar story here on snowpack. Quite interesting to see right up around April 1st, we were above long-term average. We were sort of, you know, very similar to this time last year, where you can see we're actually slightly above this time last year. Right around May 1st, same thing. We'd seen a little bit of regression, but nothing to be alarmed at. Quite comparable 2021 and 2022. And the difference in profile just year to year, and that is purely driven by the spring weather events that we see. 2023, we've basically plummeted. We've seen a very, very steep regression of the snowpack across the watershed. And only in the top alpine areas do we see any snow sort of remaining, which again, for this time of the year, is certainly in the drier sequences. So you see, you know, Tatsa Lake, Pondosi, and Wells have all but exhausted now. So Tatsa is still holding a little bit, the rest there. Same story on the Notley, and it actually finished up that the Notley snowpack ended the earliest on record. So that's that low line. You can see it come down right there. We actually saw that go to 0 earlier than ever before. So you can really see those low-lying areas, so those low elevation snowpacks ran out really quite quickly this year. The province has announced drought advisories, and you can see for us, we sit right here in this part of the province, the watershed. So we are seeing adverse impacts possible on the province's drought advisory. Again, this doesn't play a huge role in driving decision making, but it's interesting context just to get a read on the other parts of the province and to see that where we are is quite dry. What I do also find interesting is the provincial flood advisories. So here you have the same area under a drought alert, also under a high flood watch, under a flood watch for those areas. And that's being driven by these rapid snowpack melts. But the reason we're in drought is because we're just not accumulating the precipitation to counteract these hot, dry periods. And the snow that is melting onto dry lands, and we're not seeing the uptake into the land and into the ground that you would typically expect for this time of year. Observed inflows and discharge versus historical. So again, this is where we can see right up until sort of April and May, the purple chart here. And the way these charts work, and I apologise if I speak a bit fast through these ones, these are charts that we produce and share quite regularly, but there is quite a bit going on here. The blue curve is 2023, and this is our daily inflow that goes into the reservoir. So effectively, this is all of the water that's being liberated from snow or precipitation and how it flows into the reservoir. And you see that in reservoir elevation, but you also see that in our inflow calculations. So, it trickles down over the winter, nothing much and nothing revolutionary there. And as we come into the spring, you typically expect sort of a nice inflow, the spring freshet period, and then the regression as snowpack and precipitation runs out. Again, quite comparable on the 1st of April, 1st of May, quite typical, quite normal. And that's when we saw that first heat wave come through. When you saw that first bump there, we had a little bit of relief, and then that second heat wave comes through, and then you can see the regression now as the snowpacks exhaust and come down. So we exceeded long-term average quite significantly, and then we regressed and expect a regression without that snowpack residual across the rest of the summer. What's interesting to contrast it to is 2022 as well, where with comparable snowpack on the 1st of May, we saw the second wettest sequence on record in 2022, and we saw those flows peak. And that's when we saw those 3 sawtooths. Obviously, the impacts to Chislata Lake last year, the bankful flows and approaching the flood cap in Vanderhoof last year, and then ultimately the request to surcharge the reservoir. So again, quite a lot going on in that period of time, but contrasting similar snowpacks, all about the spring weather drives whether it's low or whether it's high. Again, I won't labour this point just in the interest of time, but we are expecting this is long-term average inflows just ranked across all of the years. The way we plot these is we take the average inflow forecast, we plot what could be the minimum from the historical range, the maximum from the historical range, and then the range in between. What's interesting here is back on the 1st of May, we were right at long-term average, and 1st of April, we were actually slightly above long-term average. So we see that we've regressed here. And then to contrast that, 2022's actual was all the way over here on the right-hand side. So again, similar snowpacks, very different inflow and flow profiles. So what does that mean for the reservoir level? You can see that even though in November last year we started above long-term average following that wet spring and summer last year, we've plummeted all the way below long-term average. Because of that quick melt, we've peaked up and spiked, And then you can see with the snowpack exhausting, we're expecting quite a rapid regression of that, of the reservoir elevation. And again, to contrast that, back in May 1st, June 1st, we were sitting right up here. And now we've come all the way down to here. And if this hot and dry sequence continues, it's reasonable to expect we will finish down here, nearly sort of 2.5 feet below where we would expect long-term average to be for this time of year. So quite an unusual hydrograph over the last 12 months. Skins Lake spillway release, I touched on that earlier. We're expecting to hold minimum flows 50 cubic meters per second up until the STMP. And then we are looking at the numbers for what it would be like to hold STMP at maximum flow, so 283 cubic meters per second across that period. Given this hot and dry summer, that's certainly not out of the realms of possibility, having a max flow STMP. I won't touch on the Notley just in the interest of time, but a similar story that you've seen, peak flow and regression. Similarly, the Van der Hoof flows, I won't touch on this. This is taken from the River Forecast Centre, and you can see the actual coming down into the lowest part of the historical range now. And then total expected discharge in Van der Hoof, continuing that trend down until summer temperature management. We'll expect that reasonable bump up to somewhere between sort of 250 to 350 over the STMP period, and then a typical runoff from there. So that's it on hydrology. I know I've pushed through that fairly quickly, and I know that some in the room haven't seen those charts before, but certainly if there's questions, I'm always happy to take some time to run through that. Similarly, you know, Kevin and Brian, who spent time in these charts with me before, can certainly, I'm sure, can add some flavour to those. So last slide, I just want to touch on a couple of points that we have. We are gearing up for another big summer of work in Van der Hoof and on the river and at the spillway. So we have a number of local contractors from Van der Hoof engaged at that work, the biggest of which is Avison, and also working with the SICA's environmental monitoring division to continue providing that baseline understanding of the river to inform enhancements and improvements moving forward. We're also continuing a series of research and monitoring works, again, informed by the Water Engagement Initiative Technical Committee, and able to deliver some of those improvements in knowledge gaps that we have. And similarly, that speaks to some of the work we've been doing on the river's geomorphology and that work lately as well. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on spillway operations. I've spoken about the amount of work that we have there this year, and very proud to have the Cheslata First Nations contracting division actually doing that work this year, and the management of that work is also being done by Cheslata's contracting division. So we've continued to see that relationship go from strength to strength and result in, I think, upwards of 15 full-time roles provided for both in the spillway reservoir area and even more recently into Kamano as well. So continuing to build that economic partnership as well as a partnership on environmental enhancement in the area. Okay, I'm going to pause for a breath and a drink. I've covered a lot of ground there and appreciate your patience to stick with me, but we'll open the floor for any questions.
Thanks. Yeah, any questions for Andrew? Oh,
Just if somebody could remind me.
2 seconds. My room's disconnected.
Yeah.
There you go.
Just if somebody could remind me, you talked about the average temperature in June at 19 degrees Celsius. When did we start being concerned about a significant height of temperature this summer? Is there what I forget exactly the cusp of where we become concerned?
So the way the summer temperature management plan is designed was primarily for the Chinook runs coming in, and the first early runs of Chinook traditionally come in around mid-July. And so the summer temperature management plan starts on the 15th of July and then runs through to the 15th of August.
Yeah.
That's when the real peak is. We have anecdotal evidence that that run has been getting later in time and maybe extending past. So that is one of the pieces of monitoring work that we're doing to better understand the timing of those runs. And similarly, Chinook coming in later as well also benefit from those temperatures. So we're working to quantify that, and we will have crews on the river this year looking to monitor that. But we will certainly start on the 15th of July and be pulling through through the majority of the summer.
Okay, thought it was around that time. Thanks.
Yeah.
Councillor Lozay.
Hi, Andrew. I had a question. I was looking at your chart, the Nunchako Reservoir historical elevation graph, and I'm looking at the maximum reservoir elevation in 2000 and 2001. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, would like be considering the temperatures we've been having, why back in 2000 and 2001, and certainly other years, were the elevation of the reservoir allowed to be so much lower than they are today? Like, would you consider allowing them to get low again and to manage the rivers and because our water looks sad?
Yeah, so certainly they weren't allowed to get that low. That was a product of the precipitation of those years. And it was actually quite catastrophic for the smelter. There was a curtailment in smelter production, and I think around 300 people were laid off at those years. So effectively what happens at that point is there isn't enough water in order to provide for a long enough generation to the winter. And the challenge we always have with reservoir management is not to run out of water before the next spring freshet. So the decisions we're taking today and tomorrow are we only really see if they're effective when we get to late April, early May next year. And it's all based on the likelihood of weather. If we could guarantee that we were going to have a nice wet fall, it'd be a no-brainer. Let's release a whole big slab of water. But the way the model works is it looks at all of the historical years, plots. So we take an actual data. What we do is we plot 70 years of historical range on here. So you have the highest years that might finish up here somewhere, and that's the chart we can actually see down here. I'll show that one. Next slide. This one. So we have our actual data where we are today, and we plot the wettest year on record, and that's this one here. So that's our maximum line. We plot the driest year on record, which I think is 1982, if I remember rightly, I think from this point. And that plots down to there. And then we plot every other year in between time. And that's what gives us our 80 and 20 percentile range. And then we plot a medium from there. So we're always gambling. It's always around whether we think we're trending towards this side or whether we think we're trending towards this side. And that's the hard science. What we do know today is that these events are far less predictable than they used to be, and we're seeing more irrational and erratic behaviours in the reservoir than previous. The current thinking is that, we will be progressing into a hot and dry summer period, and certainly that's what the BC Wildfire Service is predicting, and it's certainly what we're seeing, and we're seeing that leaning down towards these lower inflows. And so that's what drives us to be prudent in how that water is released.
Great. Thank you.
I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? STMP, Andrew, starts July 10th.
Yeah, so we start the pre-charge of the Cheslata system on July 10, and then the temperature monitoring starts, or the formal temperature target is in place on July 15.
Are there, going from, I know you've got that little pre-charge period, but going from 50 to 283 is going to be a heck of a jump. Is there
Yeah.
going to be any opportunity for any ramping, or is that kind of off the
I
table?
have my learned colleague Alec Mercier running those numbers for me right now. But yes, my intent is to look to step into it in some way, shape, or form to reduce that impact. But I haven't finalised that plan yet.
Well, thank you. That was a very informative presentation, and we'll all be hoping for some rain.
Absolutely. Look, you and me both. It is quite dire out there at the moment from a lands perspective, and I know talking to the wildfire service, they're preparing for quite a serious summer this year. So, okay. So look, I look forward to catching up with some of you face to face on Wednesday, Thursday, and if anyone would like to catch up for a one-on-one, I will be in town between sort of our office and a couple of other meetings with the Water Engagement Initiative, but certainly have time to grab a coffee or a catch up at some point. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Oh. Thanks, everyone. Okay, moving on to 6.1, solid fuel burning bylaw. So we have a recommendation there.
That we adopt or do the third reading and recommend.
Any discussion? Mike?
I just had a question. It was in the bylaw, section 8. It talks about the $50,000 number for a fine. And I'm just wondering, where did that number come from? Up to $50,000. It says not more than. So I guess what would be, where did the number come from, and what would be the consideration when determining what the fine would be?
So that's the maximum fine under the Offence Act, and it's what I'd say
Yeah.
the vast majority of other municipalities do, even ones our size.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, so then I guess the question is then, how do you like, it's the maximum we can find. How do we know what would get the max, like what kind of criteria would get the max? And yeah, I'm just curious.
I think it would be mostly decided by the courts
Okay.
because it has to go through the Offence Act, so it has
Oh,
to
I
be a
see.
court
Okay, great.
thing. Yeah, so the court would probably decide. So, and the maximum
I
is
see. Okay,
50,000.
great. Thank you.
Any other questions? All in favor? Carried. Okay, 6.2 zoning amendment. We have a recommendation there. Councillor Lozay, seconder. Either way. Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. 6.3 Natural Resource Committee terms of reference. We have a recommendation. Seconder. Councillor Young. Any questions? All in favor? Carried. 6.4 Annual report and statement of financial information. We have a recommendation there. Okay, so we'll start with number 1. Recommendation is Young, seconder. Councillor Lozay. Any questions? All in favor? Carried. The second recommendation, would somebody like to move it? Councillor Lozay, seconder. Councillor Bulmer. Any Questions? All in favor? Carried. 6.5, UBCM Complete Communities Grant Application. We have a recommendation there. Mover, Councillor Lozay, seconder, Councillor Young. Any questions on that one? All in favor? Carried. For information there, we have the building permit stats. Anybody have any comments or questions there? Awesome. We'll move on to councillor items. Councillor Ballmer.
My main one is, this time around with Andrew, Chamber of Commerce. I went to the meeting, the other night on the 15th. It was a great meeting. We had 12 people. There was a lot of people in attendance. They're wondering where we're standing right now with, it's on your desk. We had it put on our desk.
Yep.
Is the-
Yep.
And I had made some suggestions to them that maybe they start attending our council meetings like they used to. I go to all of their meetings and I think they should have a representative at our council meetings to hear what we're talking about as well. I also mentioned that maybe they should find out from the district commander what we're doing and get involved with some of our sorry.
Oh, has went to sleep?
It's sending out its little waves and be powering up. Apologize.
No worries. Yeah, I'll get it here once it, yeah, there we go.
Okay, so they are looking at maybe getting a hold of us, and I told them I would keep them informed of events that we're doing, July 1st days, Pride days, that sort of thing. And they want to start getting involved with it somehow as well. And basically they need to get out there. So they're going to be doing that. Their chamber membership is was tied to business licenses. They don't know where that stands right now, and I don't know. I told them I would ask that question. And they're wondering if they can do something, if we can suggest that something they could do to help out with tourism. And then I also mentioned that that's where that came from. So it was a good meeting, and we'll talk about it. Time comes, so that was on the 15th of June, and it was, they've got a very active group now who want to move the chamber forward. They need the help. So,
Awesome. Councillor Young, you had a question?
Yeah, I think it'd be, we've talked about this. I feel like we go in circles. We've talked about this.
Yeah.
Good enough? Yeah, I just feel like we're going in circles.
Yeah.
Wasn't gonna go.
Okay, okay. No, go ahead then. Go ahead. Okay, anything else, Tom?
no, that was it.
Awesome. We'll move on to Councillor Young.
Just one meeting and I know. On that, so she probably want to touch base. We had to, pardon me, 6 pages? More than last time. So, actually a really good meeting with our housing committee. Had a good presentation from the fellow from Edmonton. And then I think some of the conversations near the end of the meeting actually quite fruitful as well. We also have to get some wordage around a submission to UBCM around what we're doing with our housing in our community and how we can get some more assistance from the province and really move forward with a plan that's geared specifically for our community or other northern communities, but something more specific, as it seems to be that almost everything right now that's being offered isn't really geared for small rural communities. So I think part of the task at hand is for us to come up with something to present to them that would allow them to say, hey, you know, that is something that meets everybody's needs. We can move forward in that direction. So anyway. And and then this this weekend, everybody should remind themselves, looking forward to the Canada Day celebrations. And I know a few of us will be at the museum site, and there's a lot going on throughout the community the rest of the day too, so.
No, so June 15th, I joined Mayor Moutry at Farmer's Market. He cut the ribbon. I couldn't. It would work. But it was so exciting to see all the new vendors there, the food trucks, the music. It was a really, really good vibe. And what a great place for the community to come together. And it was just, I was, I haven't been able to be there very much in the, just haven't been able because I'm always at the resort, but it was awesome. June 20th, I had a library board meeting and a few things came up and I'd really like to understand more about it, but they only got 50% of their summer student grant this year because they were told that by Canada Summer Jobs that no libraries qualify for 100% of the summer grant. And that's absolutely something new. They've never encountered that before. So I thought, that might be something worth following up with because that that was new. On June 21st, as Councillor Young mentioned, we had our housing committee meeting and we had a presentation from IDEA, which is an acronym for Infill Development Edmonton Association. And certainly Edmonton has many different, a lot different challenges than we do in our smaller community. But some of the things that we pulled out or that I pulled out that I thought would be more relevant to Vanderhoof was one of the things that IDEA does is they teach developers how to submit their best applications so permits can be approved within 20 days. And I've heard repeatedly that time is money for contractors and development. So to have a permit approved, a building permit in 20 days was pretty significant. He talked about some of the barriers and one of the things that he said was, and I think this is significant for Vanderhoof, is that new infill houses are smaller than typical suburban. So as I say suburban, that would be our typical, one house on one lot kind of home in Vanderhoof that we have here. They're smaller, but the cost is higher. So I think that's significant because we know from our housing assessment that we have a lot of folks living in houses that is, that's too much house for the amount of people that are living there. But they're reluctant to move because when they downsize, they're not downsizing into dwellings. They'll be smaller dwellings, but higher costs. And so I think, that's something to really think about. He also suggested that another barrier is a complicated planning framework because there's frequent need to rezone land. So again, that's something that maybe, for us to think about as well. So are we making it streamlined? And of course, the minister's meeting request. And we talked about in our draft about appraisals, but it came up that it's really difficult for small builders and contractors and developers to get money. Banks just won't lend them the money that they need. And so that is a huge issue. And of course, infrastructure. And we know how expensive infrastructure is. So those are certainly some things that we need to make sure that our minister is aware of. So that's it for me.
Awesome. Got a lot of the farmers market again was great. That's going back within this. It's great to see how that's grown. Really spreading out through the park. It's going to be interesting to see how they manage that growth in the future, right? Because there's only a certain amount of space there, and innovative solutions, I'm sure, can make it work. Lots of kilometers on my truck last week. NDIT RAC meeting on Monday, the 19th. Interesting, they're in the process of changing their intakes, which is going to be better for us. There's only going to be 3 intakes in a year, which practically there's only 3 intakes in a year now. The money's spent by intake number 4. Moving that back a little bit. So just give a little bit more time in the year to get your ducks in a row so you're not rushing super fast for intake number 1. Really good thought process there. I think it'll streamline it a lot. Later on that afternoon, I was back in town meeting with Northern Health, talking about the anticipated service interruptions, which of course we did have 2 late week. How to manage that, how to message it out. It's an unfortunate situation. It's a tough one. It's going to take a lot of work to get back to on the level. One of the problems we have in Vanderhoof is it's not a lot of resource difference between ticking along fine and then when you have a crisis, it's not a lot of personnel going down, right? It's a typical small staff problem. So that's something we will be working on, and I'll be giving a lot of attention to. On the 20th, there was a regional solid waste advisory group meeting in Burns Lake. I was elected chair there. Looking forward to working on that. As I'm sure most of you are aware, solid waste is actually where most of your regional district taxes go. It's a huge thing, and I'm working on how we can work further on diversion. Basically, if we get it into a recycling program, it's either cost neutral or you might even make a little bit of money. If it goes into landfill, it costs. So how do we get that diversion happening more and more to keep that tax pressure down is going to be a huge thing. So I'm really excited on that. It's a good committee, lots of good members on it. So looking forward to see where that goes. Wednesday the 21st was National Indigenous Peoples Day. I thought it was a great event. So many people having fun. I was there the whole day. Hats off to everybody involved in organizing that. It was wonderful. 22nd back at the regional district for our board meeting. Went well, not a huge amount to report coming out of that. This week, of course, as Andrew mentioned, Wednesday, Thursday is WEI in Vanderhoof, Wednesday afternoon and Thursday all day. So if anybody's interested, let me know. I can get you information and go from there. Okay, anybody have any questions for anybody on all of that? Oh, one last one I'll throw in there. Did have lunch today with Jerry Thiessen and Jennifer Little, working around medical recruitment. Got some opportunities coming up. One of them is mid-August. There's a bunch of medical students in town for in the area for 3 days. It's a group of 8. They're going to be splitting their time between on one of the days, 4 will be here, 4 in Fraser Lake, then they're going to split it around, and we're working on some activities and some stuff there. But we were thinking on one of the nights, we could potentially do a DOV barbecue, much like we did. You'll remember that a few years ago, down in the park, have some events there, get to meet and greet. We actually, out of that one, did get some people come to Vanderhoof eventually when they were done their education. So would like to move forward working on that with Margaret, and then we'll get that happening. I'll get dates out to you as it comes, but just want to give you a heads up now that's one of the ones on the table. Very excited. Jerry's very excited to be getting involved. Got some potential people coming through, and yeah, that'll be great. So now, any questions on the reports? Okay.
Just want to mention.
Yes.
Speech there, and he did a very good job. So it was I think another
Yeah, I got you on.
Okay, it was a good event, and it was well attended, but it's good to see everyone there.
That's good. I do apologize for not being there. I was at a training event out in Talca for search and rescue, but yeah, I'm glad that Councillor Frankel could give a speech and other councillors could be there and show our support. Awesome. Okay, we have no correspondence, so I am going to declare us adjourned. Thank you all. Let's take 5.
10, 20.